It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160 and 101.1 FM, and we're so happy to be joined on the phone this morning by Tim McGrath, who's written the book called James Monroe, A Life. And what a life it was. Brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Tim, good morning.
Good morning, Todd, and thanks for having me today.
Hey, you're a Pennsylvania boy, huh?
Yes, sir, out of Delaware County.
Yeah.
And had a couple of good friends that went to Indiana University that I played high school baseball with.
Oh, terrific.
Well, we're setting the Wayback Machine there, Mr. Peabody. That was in 69 into the 70s.
Well, we're going to set it really way back as we talk about James Monroe here this morning. As it was put by one, the last founding father to hold the presidency, and I think you're the one who put it that way. You know, I was at James Monroe's estate 2 summers ago, and it was amazing to me that you can look through the gap they have there, and a couple miles away you can see Monticello, and nearby is James Madison's, and there's James Monroe's, and that's a good place to start. Those 3 of the founding fathers were very, very intimately connected politically and personally, weren't they?
Yeah, they were, and that's a good opening, too. And I'll put in a plug. Monroe's State Highland has been ably run by a young lady, Sarah Bond Harper, an archaeologist who actually met her husband at a dig. And I said, you know, they bumped heads. I said, where was that? And she said, Pompeii. And I went, oh, of course. If you're going to, you know, marry an archaeologist and you're one, what better place to have your first date? But she's done a remarkable job there and actually found the foundation of what they never realized was his home. They don't know when it burned down in the 19th century, but it wouldn't rival Monticello, but maybe Montpelier.
Yeah.
But they were really, you're exactly right. Jefferson was mentor to both of them, and they were the 3 best of friends. They had their falling outs in and out over the years, but they were quite a tight trio.
One of the things about your book is you begin to understand, or we come to understand, exactly how difficult it was to put a country together in that day and age, as it would be in any day and age, and how Monroe was a part of that. It wasn't a big group of guys that held hands and everybody had the same ideals and everybody was in harmony with this. It was a struggle among the founding fathers, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. That's a good point, Todd. I think, you know, they all came in with one idea, especially as into the mid-1770s as far as independence was concerned. But their approach was extremely different, and it set the stage for, you know, some partisan fighting that lasted for decades. And Monroe was certainly a part of that. He was more of a Jeffersonian agrarian Republican than Jefferson. And if he was alive today, he'd be on MSNBC or Fox News every afternoon, depending on what the issue was, be what channel he'd be on. But he was a very willing acolyte for Jefferson's viewpoints and policies. He would write editorials or reposts in Jefferson-supported and sometimes financed newspapers against Alexander Hamilton's Federalist publications. And they always used an old Roman or Greek general or politician's name. They never used their own. And it's kind of crazy times with that.
One of the interesting things about your book that really stands out to me is he revered George Washington. He wasn't in the boat crossing the Delaware, even though the artist put him there. But even his reverence for George Washington, that was shaken through the course of political events down through the years. He and Washington had a falling out as well.
Yeah, they did, and it's interesting because you're right. I mean, Monroe was an 18-year-old lieutenant, and he actually volunteered on Christmas Day of '76 to be one of the 2 officers that led the advance party, the skirmish line. They crossed the Delaware hours before Washington and the remnants of his army did. In fact, he was seriously wounded and would have died, except his men woke up a doctor who thought that there were Hessians out pilfering his chickens and came along with them and saved Monroe from bleeding to death. So Washington had his eye on him from the get-go. And while their policies differed, once the Constitution came into play, he did send Monroe to France, thinking it would make sense to have a Jefferson Francophile in Paris at the same time he was sending John Jay, an arch-federalist, to work out the Jay Treaty in England. And Monroe really felt put out because he was kept in the dark and embarrassed about what Jay was doing when the French told him, not Washington. And eventually he was told to come home, and he returned, as John Adams put it, who was president by then, a disgraced minister. Washington's so mad he writes a 400-page book, Viewpoint of the Executive from Abroad, about Washington. And Washington's known for all his austerity and dignity. But Washington's copy of this book has notes written on the side that in today's vocabulary would have included a few more stronger words. So they really had a breach. And ironically, Monroe sought to heal that once he was elected governor. And it was at the same time that Washington passed away. In fact, he comes in from 2 hard days of reviewing his grounds, and he's sitting there freezing and asks his amanuensis Tobias Smollett to read him the news. And when he reads it, the Assembly has appointed Monroe governor of Virginia. He gets apoplectic, and Smollett can't calm him down. And he gets so worked up, he said, go to bed, and he never got out of bed. So Monroe never got the chance to, have any kind of rapprochement with him, but he did emulate Washington when he became president.
Tim McGrath is our guest. The book is James Monroe, A Life. So that episode obviously has to play some role in the development later of the Monroe Doctrine, for which James Monroe is most famous. Did it not have a role?
It did, and that's a really good point. One of the things that fascinated me, Todd, is how this very arch partisan politician, starts to mature. By the time he's in Madison's cabinet as Secretary of State and later both State and Secretary of War, he's gone beyond Jefferson's policies, and he's looking at things that the Jeffersonians could not abide: a standing army, a national bank, things that he saw were necessary by the way the United States was getting clobbered in the War of 1812. And when he moves into the presidency, he drops all partisanship aside and decides to, govern and as like Washington did, by consensus and leave your partisanship at the door. It's even a Federalist paper that heralds his first term as the era of good feelings, which has stuck ever since. Mm-hmm. And he really comes this close to eliminating partisanship while he's president.
It's just amazing. We only have a few minutes left with Tim McGrath. I'd love to talk to you about Monroe's role in the Louisiana Purchase, about how he picked up the pieces literally after the War of 1812 and got Washington back on its feet, the city of. But I want to talk to you about actually deciding to write the book, finding the resources, and how that all developed, and what made you write this book.
Well, my editor at Penguin, Brent Howard, who's a brilliant young guy, he's a year older than my son. We had done a book on the Continental Navy, and he was saying, let's look at something. Let's look at some big topics. And he brought up presidents. And when Monroe's name came up, I just laughed and said, when I was 7 years old, he was my favorite president. I'd been to Valley Forge that summer, and the park ranger told about how Monroe was one of the officers that spent the winter there, and how he'd been wounded at Trenton, and there was a kid's book on him. And as a history major, I knew Monroe's role in things. But boy, Todd, I'll tell you, when I got into everything, I didn't know enough about Monroe to hurt me. And the more I found, the more I wanted to do this. 50 years of public service as a soldier, diplomat, and politician. He held more offices than any president before or since, and the experts with his documents and his all his records were just more than wonderful, helping point me in the right direction on everything, including his very difficult involvement and approach to slavery and Native American affairs. But the other thing that did it for me was his wife. Elizabeth Monroe was probably the Jacqueline Kennedy of the founding First Ladies. She's beautiful. She's very talented. She has a bit of reserve. But what really made me want to do this was finding out that while he was in France, his wife on her own took a carriage to the prison where Lafayette's wife was being kept, and she was waiting to go to the headsman's, to the guillotine. Her mother and sisters had already been executed. And when she hears the turnkey come to her cell, she's very upset until she finds out he's bringing her down to meet Elizabeth Monroe. And it's the first step that they take to get Adrian Lafayette out of prison and then out of France. When I saw that was, oh yeah, we go with this.
Well, you've spent a lot of your time, of course, on the water as an author, but it's good that you're on the land now and you're talking to us about James Monroe. Tim McGrath, the book is called James Monroe, A Life, and, well, it is. He might be the little brother of all the founding fathers, but you've done it well. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Todd, thank you very much, and my best for the pirate season, and I hope that you and your family and your audience stay safe and healthy through this crisis.
And you as well. Have a wonderful day today.
You too, sir. You too, sir.